Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10 and support the channel at the same time. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends. Welcome to part 3 of our 6-part Ixalan Full Set review. Today we're going to look at all of the black cards in the set. Now, we looked at white already, we looked at blue. You can catch up. There's a playlist on the channel if you missed those. Tomorrow we'll be back with red, but if you've been watching the series, you kind of know what to expect here. We're going to look at every card individually, and first and foremost, analyze them through the limited lens. So we're going to be talking about their utility in draft and sealed, but beyond that, any card that maybe has more potential for some constructed formats, we will definitely discuss that as well. Now, quickly, before we get started, if you check out the description below, you'll find a few ways to help support our channel, help us keep doing what we're doing, one of which is our Patreon page that's linked below. We're actually really close to our next goal. You'll find some Amazon product links down there. If you make any purchases on Amazon, once you go through those links, we'll get a small percentage back. And then finally, Flipside Gaming, they're doing some pre-orders right now for Ixalan as well as Iconic Masters. They've offered a promo code for our viewers for 10% off any purchase of $10 or more, which is awesome. So, with that being said, now let's get into the cards. We got a lot to talk about. We're going to begin with Anointed Deacon. This is a fine pickup for the vampire deck, quite honestly. It's not a horrible card if you're not playing vampires. I mean, this becomes basically a 5/3 when it attacks because it is a vampire itself. You can target itself with it. Or it's a 3/3 when you're not attacking. But I'll be honest with you, I feel like for 5 mana, there's better 5-drops than that. Where you want to play this is if you have other vampires, maybe some lifelink vampires you can target with this, and then all of a sudden that +2 is really a 4-life swing, and the card becomes a lot better. So if I'm not into vampires pretty heavily, I'm probably skipping this one for something else unless I'm really desperate for a 5-drop. But if I'm in vampires, then yeah, this is great. This will be a fine pickup for you. Not the type of card I'm going to first pick and try to force vampires, but if I'm already in there, it will be just fine. Argol's Bloodfast, which transforms into Temple of Aclazotz. This card is phenomenal. Look at the history of Magic. Cards that allow you to pay life and or mana to draw cards tend to be very good and many times very constructed playable. This one, no exception. And here's what I like about the card. It only costs 2. You can get it out early, and as the game progresses, you can take those extra resources of life/mana and convert them into card draw, and that is awesome. So just a transfer of resources to be able to see more cards and pull ahead of your opponent is a fantastic strategy. Furthermore, what I love about this design is it's in the color in this set where you have one tribe, the pirates, trying to give you extra mana with those treasure tokens, and you have, on the other side, the vampires trying to give you extra life with the lifelink. Put those together in a limited environment, and you actually have maybe some free rolls with this card, and that's actually pretty sweet too. I also want to point out that you don't have to transform it. It says may transform, so there are times it might make sense not to, so keep that in mind. If you do transform, though, especially for constructed formats, it is a way to perhaps play a second copy of this because it is legendary, so once you transform it to the temple, then you could play another copy with the front side, the Argol's Bloodfast, and that would be okay, so that way it doesn't get stuck in your hand. And they actually work well in tandem together, too. You have this kind of quasi-Diamond Valley effect on the other side that also taps for mana. It's actually better than Diamond Valley. It's more restricted than this is. So this is a way to also have a sack outlet, which can be very important sometimes. We see there's some good threaten effects in this set. You're going to see them tomorrow when we look at red, so sack outlets and threaten effects can lead to some value too. So there's just a ton of things going on with this card. This is very, very standard playable. I have no doubt we'll see this in standard. It is also probably going to see a little bit of modern play. I'm thinking maybe Death Shadow decks might want to try something like this. I'd at least want to test it out. I think it could be sweet there. And beyond that, yes, first pickable in draft. Pick it up, play it. Doesn't matter if you have vampires and or pirates or enough of them that you feel the resources are going to be added into this card. It's okay. Even if you're just paying your life and paying mana for this, you might be able to activate it not as many times if you don't have backup, but at the same time, just activating it a few times during a game is going to be worth it and could actually win you games. This card is really good. Don't overlook it. I know a lot of people will look at this and say, I don't want to pay life and mana for this. I'd rather just keep my life in case I need it and try to put some creatures on the battlefield or something like that. But ultimately, in the long run, having those cards is going to help you so much over the course of the game. It's really going to change the dynamic. So, I don't know. I don't have too much more to say about it. Just a really good card here. Bishop of the Bloodstained. This one's okay. It's a really watered down version of Grey Merchant. Grey Merchant was great. This isn't going to be great, but this is going to be okay if you have enough vampires. So for 5 mana, getting a 3/3 isn't exciting, and because it's so dependent on the vampires you have, you're not going to see this crossover into standard or anything like that. But if you have a lot of vampires, again, I'm not going to first pick this and try to force vampires, but if you have a lot of them in your draft or you're sealed, then yeah, it's definitely runnable if you don't have a better 5-drop especially. Blightkeeper, okay, we saw a couple other cards like this one over the last few days. I like those ones a little better than this one, though. This one's okay. It's definitely playable. It's just not always going to make your build, I think. Sometimes you'll have better 1-drops and maybe a better 2-drop you'd rather play in lieu of this. It's a 1/1 flyer for 1, though. That's not too bad. Sometimes you can get a little damage across early, but more importantly, that ability later is going to drain your opponent for 4 life. It fits in with the vampire strategy more than anything, of course, because you can sometimes take that life and convert it to resources of some kind through other cards, and having a way to gain life is going to help those cards become better, of course. But I don't know, you're also putting a lot of resources in, and it's happening so late game that if you're not already at least winning or at least close to winning, that might not matter that much anymore. So I don't know, I think it's coming a little bit too late actually. If this costs maybe 6 to activate or something like that, I might be more on board with it, but as it stands, it's okay. It's definitely runnable in some builds, especially if you're looking for some low drops for your curve. Bloodcrazed Paladin. This card actually reminds me a little bit of Cabal Ghoul from Arabian Nights, which I know it's going back a ways, but that card was a black and 2, and it got a +1/+1 counter for everything that died, and those creatures that died were added up at the end of the turn. So the same as this card, you could do something like play a Wrath effect and then play the Ghoul. You would actually get all the benefit from that Wrath, which was kind of sweet and unique. Another trick people used to do was play something like an Oubliette or like an Oblivion Ring style card on it, and then their Veneral's Disc, the Ghoul would come back because the enchantment would go away, and it would still get the benefit of all the creatures that died that turn. So this is similar but better in some ways, of course, because it's 1 less to cast. It's a vampire, which is going to be very relevant at times. And it also has flash, so if a lot of things die on your opponent's turns, you can just simply flash this into play and get the benefit of it then. So it's adding some versatility to the card. I like the card a lot. I don't necessarily see it in standard though, because it's a little too dependent on what's going on around it. One of the issues you used to have with Cabal Ghoul back in the day was you'd be stuck with this like 10/10 Ghoul, and it would just keep getting chump blocked, and you'd get beat down in the air with like Sarah Angels. So I'm sure you might have some similar issues if you try to play something like this and construct it. But for limited purposes, I think it's a fine card. It's probably a little bit better if you have some other ways to boost vampires in your deck, of course. But I think it's really runnable. Just don't think of it as a 2-drop. You don't really want this to be a turn 2 play. This is more like a turn 5 or turn 6 play when things start dying, and you can capitalize on that ability a little bit. So be careful when you count up your curve. But other than that, yeah, it's very playable and could be a relatively high pick in some packs. Boneyard Parley. Alright, this card is actually pretty sweet. It is a mythic. I'm going to start off by saying I don't really see it in standard because it's a little too expensive and a little too situational on what's going on, again, in graveyards for you to be able to consistently get a good play out of this. So I don't see it there, but I do see it as being a fun card for Commander and a very playable card in Limited. And it plays a little different probably in different situations. Like most of the time in Commander, you're going to try to pick some really crazy creatures out of people's graveyards. An opponent is going to go ahead and put them in 2 piles. They're going to try to keep you off the better creatures to the best of their ability. But depending on what you want to do, whether you're trying to go tall or go wide, you're going to make a decision based on the piles they make. And you're getting benefit from it, no doubt, right? And these cards go directly into play. So if you have a great creature, even in your deck, like a really strong reanimation target, then maybe that's your plan, that ultimately you just end up reanimating that, and that's good enough probably for the mana cost at times, right? Now, the other way you can go with this in Commander is you can form an alliance with somebody, and maybe they're the ones creating the piles for you, and that could be really sweet, right? Now, for limited purposes, I think the card's still good. Of course, you're probably not going to get like the huge play you would see in Commander with something like this, but you might just get a go wide type play, like pick 5 like mid-sized creatures on the battlefield. Your opponent splits them into a group of 3 and a group of 2, and you take like the 2/2, the 2/3, and the 3/2, and that might just be good enough for what you're spending here. That's actually a great swing, I think. So yeah, just generally, I think it's first pickable. Really good card. Much like most of the other mythics, though, it doesn't feel like it's going to be a really strong standard card, with the exception of maybe the Planeswalkers in this set. but that's okay by me. I feel like that's a fine design choice because it helps to keep the price of standard down a little bit and creates situations where commander players can still get their hands on some really cool cards for their decks. Contract Killing. Okay, interesting name for a Magic card. I do like the almost maybe Royal Assassin-esque art that they have on the card, but this is a 5 casting cost limited removal spell. We've seen these many times in different limited environments. This is actually a pretty good one out of all the ones we've seen in the past. I like this because you actually recoup a couple of the mana. So yes, it costs 5 to activate. It's going to take a little time to get there, but it destroys a creature. It's unconditional. Then at that point you get 2 treasure tokens, which actually get you in a situation where maybe you can even play a second play that turn some of the time. So I think it's actually pretty cool. You do recoup 2 of that 5 mana you spent. So yeah, I would be happy to pick this up actually pretty high in a lot of packs. Maybe first pickable some of the time, especially if you're desperate for some removal. It's good. It will definitely do work for you. Costly Plunder. Now, this does require you to sacrifice a artifact or creature. Again, I have mentioned before, there are some threatened effects in this format, so sometimes this could play well with one of those effects. But even if it doesn't, Black also has Pirates, which create, guess what? Treasure tokens, so that could be a good way to go with this too. Having said that, the card, if you can meet that requirement, it only costs 2, it's an instant speed, draw 2 cards. Yeah, this is a really good card. I think this potentially could see some standard play, maybe in the Pirate deck if they have expendable treasures and such. It's just a good engine to keep your deck moving, and this is going to be great for you in Limited too. Dark Nourishment. This is another 5 casting cost removal spell, but this one gives you a lot more options. It's an instant, it drains 3 life, so it might work well with some vampire strategies, and also you can go to a player with this, not just a creature. So even though it can't deal with some of the larger creatures necessarily, unless maybe you have another way to do damage like through combat or something, you still have the versatility of taking out small creatures or maybe going right to your opponent's face, and I do like that. I could see myself running one of these in a deck and being pretty happy with it. It's probably not a first pick for me or anything like that, but you could get this maybe middle of the pack and it'll be just fine for you. Deadeye Tormentor. This one I'm not crazy about. Yesterday we saw an almost identical card in blue. It was a blue and 2/2/2 pirate, which the raid ability was you draw a card, and I actually like that one. This one, though, letting my opponent just discard a card of their choice, it just doesn't feel like it's good enough. I don't want to pay 3 for a 2/2. Have to activate the raid, and that's what my activation is. My opponent ends up pitching an extra land or something most of the time. Just doesn't feel like it's good enough. I feel like there's better 3-drops out there, and there's even some better 2-drops out there. And in this set, even some better 1-drops, believe it or not. There's some great 1-drops here. So, yeah, I don't see myself using this unless I'm really desperate for something at my 3 spot. Deadeye Tracker. Interesting 1-drop here. This is one of the few cards that can actually explore more than one time once it's on the battlefield. Comes in as a 1/1 for 1, so very fragile. It's a pirate though, sometimes that matters. Although it is only 1 time per turn because it does tap, and you do have to exile 2 target cards from an opponent's graveyard to get this to work. That might not always be an option, especially early on in the game, right? So that could be awkward at times. And when you're exploring with this card, you're not trying to build this up to become like a 5/5 or 6/6 or anything like that. That's not the plan here. The plan here is to try to get through your deck faster and just get the efficiency of the explorers as you go through. And it's also to keep your opponent off any sort of graveyard shenanigans. And you'll see as we go through the black cards, there's actually a fair amount of cards that allow you to bring things back from your graveyard, either to your hand or in the case of Boneyard Parley, even to the battlefield. So there are some reasons, not many in this set, but there are some reasons to keep your opponent's graveyard in check. So at times, at worst, this might be a sideboard card you bring in to deal with a deck that's running some of those effects. Beyond that, I'd be happy to run this, though, just generally, because I think even if you explore with this maybe 2-3 times in a game, if you're lucky, you're definitely getting your money's worth here for what you're paying for it. Deathless Ancient. Okay, here's another card that does have some graveyard utility, which, again, if your opponent's playing this, may be another reason to play that previous card. But I will say this about the card. If you're not in Vampires, it's okay. It's not always going to make your build in that case. Like, if you need a 4/4 flyer, it's still very, very runnable. But if you're in Vampires, this becomes a very annoying card. Vampires will have hopefully a lot of token generation going on, and there'll be a time or two during a game that hopefully you'll be able to return this from your graveyard to your hand, and it becomes just a persistent threat that your opponent's going to have to find an answer for, or else they could be in trouble. So just overall, this card becomes a lot better pickup if you are already in the Vampire plan, but it's still playable at times if you're not. Desperate Castaways. This is a fantastic 2-drop. I mean, if this said 2/3 for 2 and it had Defender, I'd be fine with it. Now, if I can get an artifact into play, then yes, I can still attack with it. Maybe that happens too late to matter a lot of the time, but you know what? I'm still defending myself against some 2/2s or some more aggressive strategies, maybe running some 2/1 hasters or something like that. And if that's the case, you know what? This card really performed for me for 2 mana. I'll be happy to run 1 or 2 of these in a deck, especially if I have some ways to generate some early treasure tokens. Alright, speaking of cards that could give you an early treasure token, Dire Fleet Hoarder. This is a good 2-drop too. A 2/1 for 2, and when it dies, you get a treasure token. I'm a sucker for these type of 2-drops that are like 2/1s that give you something when they die. I always play them, and I've had some success with them. I like trading and just getting a little bit of an edge, and this card will do that for you. So overall, I'd be happy to play a couple of these in a lot of limited builds. Dire Fleet Interloper. This one is a 2/2 menace for 4, but it explores. Some of the time it will be a 3/3, not all the time, and when it isn't, you explore it. I feel like this is a fine card. I mean, maybe it doesn't always make your cut because you are starting to get a little expensive at the 4 spot. You might want something a little more substantial in some decks, but I feel like this is a good card to run because when it is a 3/3 menace, you definitely got your money's worth, and when it's not, you still got to explore, which I still think is a really good mechanic. Dire Fleet Ravager. Okay, this one's a mythic, and it's a little awkward for me. 4/4 for 5. Menace Death Touch. I like that. I like that combination, Menace Death Touch. But I gotta wonder, how often am I playing this for 5, attacking my opponent, and then they just simply block with a couple 2/2s, or like a 3/3 and a 2/2. And I 2 for 1 them, which is good. But is that worth it for 5 mana? I don't know. I'm not sure. There could be better things I could be doing maybe than that for 5 mana. Now, let's take into account this other ability where everybody loses a third of their life rounded up when it comes into play. Aside from that being math, that could be good. That could be bad. It just depends. You don't know yet. It's a little bit high variance, right? Sometimes that's going to benefit you. Sometimes it is not going to benefit you. So all of that, you take that inconsistency based on the fact that the payout doesn't feel all that good. And I don't know if I'm always running this. I mean, it's still a substantial creature. A lot of times you need a 5-drop, especially in sealed. Like, it's probably just fine most of the time. But I don't know if it's just all that great, especially for a mythic. Maybe I'm just undervaluing it a little bit because I'm expecting more from a mythic. I don't know. But yeah, it just feels really strange to me. If it was, I don't know, Menace and for Strike, I might be a little more interested because then it's going to be a little harder for my opponent to just take the thing out. But I don't know. Like, is it playable? Yes. Is definitely playable, especially in the limited environment. It's probably going to be just fine for you a lot of the time. But I could see times where I skip this one, which is really weird for a mythic when you're talking about limited. Duress. Alright, this is a phenomenal card. It's a reprint, obviously. Seen standard play in the past. It will see it again. And this is still good for you in limited too. It's cheap. It gives you information. That might be the most important part of this card is for 1 mana, you get a lot of information, especially on like turn 1. It really lets you know what you can expect from your opponent going forward. Now, hopefully, they do have a non-creature, non-land they can hit with this as well, and they'll have to discard it. Now, in limited, granted, a lot of decks are creature-heavy, so maybe you miss with this, but you still got that information. Because of that, it's worth it. And if you're lucky, you hit a removal spell or something, and that could be really sweet. So, yeah, the card is phenomenal. Play it. You'll be happy you did. And, yeah, I can't really say too much more about it. We kind of know what Duress does. It's awesome. Fathom Fleet Captain, I'm actually pretty interested in this card. Cost 2 with Menace 2/1. It feels pretty aggressive to me, which I do like. And then on top of it, at any time if I'm attacking and I have another non-token pirate in play, I can pay 2 to get a 2/2 pirate Menace token. So that feels kind of awesome. Very good in limited. Let me say that first off. Even if I don't have that other pirate in play right away, and I can just get some early attacks in with a 2/1 Menace, I'm pretty on board for that, especially if I'm on the play. And if I do have the pirate, then at some point, it could even be my opponent trades and I create a new 2/2 to replace it. That could be okay as well, especially if I don't have an immediate play for the next turn or two. At least it's something to do that is upgrading your board state slightly. So I do like that a lot. I think this might see some standard play in a pirate build. As long as you have some consistent low casting cost pirates to come in with this thing, it could be decent. So this is definitely one to watch. Fathom Fleet Cutthroat. I like these type of cards. I feel like it's been a while since we've seen one of these. And yeah, these are good. They surprise your opponents. A lot of times you have your combat phase and then some big creature they have got damage, you put this into play and finish it off. Or maybe you have some sort of ping effect, you can ping something and then simply put this into play and surprise your opponent. So yeah, good card to have. Even as a 3/3 for 4 in a pinch, if you just have to play it, it's still not bad. It's like on par for limited stats. So it's just kind of all upside. So definitely, yeah, this is a very good card and a relatively high pick, definitely for a common, I think, in draft. Grim Captain's Call. This card's kind of funny. This rewards you for that sealed pool that just has like no consistency. So if you're playing with all different tribes and you're just trying to hobble something together, at least you have this card maybe to help you out a little bit. It's okay. It's not for all builds, obviously. If you really are tight, like in a draft, maybe you're really tight to a certain tribe, this card is okay, but there might be better cards you're running for 3. If you do have a couple tribes going on, though, like, for example, Merfolk and Pirates do tend to work really well together, then, yeah, this might be worth running, at least in some builds. Heartless Pillage. This is actually a decent card. Now, if it didn't have the raid ability, it's very, of course, Mind Rot-esque, and those are very playable at times unlimited. It just depends on your build. Like if you're trying to be slower, more methodical, trying to attack your opponent's hand, then a card like this is fine. Now your opponent chooses what they discard, but it is 2 cards. If you play this at the right time, you can still kind of get them with it, right? Now this also has the raid attached to it, so every once in a while you might get a treasure token as well, which does again help you at the very least recoup the cost. Beyond that, you could use the treasure token to fix color, you can use it to temporarily ramp, or you can use it with one of these payoff cards that have a thing you can do with treasures. We'll see some of those coming up in a few moments here. So yeah, it's a fine card to play. I've seen decks even run sometimes 2 of these type of cards and be successful. So just again, depends on your build. You won't always run it, but some of the time it'll be just fine for you. Kite Sail Freebooter. Okay, this is very similar to having a creature with duress, although it's exile instead of discard, so that's actually kind of sweet. In some cases, a little bit better than duress. Now, you're paying 1 more, but you're getting a 1/2 flyer. So much like duress, all the good things I said about that card, I'll say about this card. Happy to run this. You get the creature to boot. I wouldn't mind running a duress turn 1, running this turn 2 even. And granted, sometimes you won't get any more out of it, just maybe another card of information. But if you can hit like 2 removal spells or something, you're going to have a really good day. So I think it would be worth it. Definitely worth running. I think this is a high pick in draft. And this could see some standard play. I think it can cross over there, actually. Lurking Chupacabra. This one's good if you have enough Explore triggers. If you don't have a consistent Explore trigger happening in your deck, then skip this one, because you don't want to play 2/3 for 4 typically. But if you have a fair amount of Explore triggers and you feel like this is going to be triggered a couple times a game or something like that, it's definitely worth it. You'll be happy to run it. March of the Drowned. I like these type of cards. Cards that allow me to take my creatures back from my graveyard to my hand. This one only costs 1, and if I'm in the pirate tribe, I can actually grab 2 cards for just 1. That's super sweet. Cards like this allow you to just be a little more loose with your blocks, maybe some of your chump blocking early on to save life, or some trades that eventually you know you're going to get more of an advantage of than your opponent is going to. So these cards are very fine to play. I'd be happy to run a couple of these, whether I'm in Pirates or not. Mark of the Vampire. This one is a reprint, actually, and it's an enchantment aura. I'm usually not high on enchantment auras, but I don't hate this one. We saw another one earlier in the week that I didn't hate either. I will give you permission to play this one too, but just think about it a little bit. It costs 4, but it's a really nice swing if you can pull it off. +2/+2 and lifelink is actually pretty decent for 4 mana. Now, don't play it into open mana, though. Don't get 2 for 1. At the very least, get 1 attack out of this. If you get 1 attack out of it, you got your money's worth, and then you can get 2 for 1, and I'm okay with it. But I don't want to just put this out and have it get 2 for 1. That's not going to be a good day for you. So think about it a little bit, pick your time to play it, but it can be good. I'm happy running one of these, maybe even 2 of these in some builds. Queen's Agent. Okay, it costs 6, but it has lifelink, and it's a vampire, so that could matter. And sometimes it's a 4/4, but even when it's not, you still got to explore. Even though it feels expensive, I'm okay playing one of these in probably a lot of builds, quite honestly. Sometimes I might be a little heavy on some really big bombs, and I could skip this, no doubt. But I think a lot of the time, I'll run it, and I'll be happy with it. Queen's Bay Soldier. Okay, now this one is just a grizzly bear. It's a 2/2 for 2. It's black instead of green, of course. But sometimes these are critical. Even though we are seeing a lot of bears with upside nowadays, Like, sometimes you just need these 2-drops. It is the most critical spot in your limited decks. I've said this in many videos. I'm sure you've heard it before, but it is very, very true. Remember when you're drafting, especially like pack 3, you really have to think about your curve. There are times you're going to pass a big bomb or maybe just a really good creature that's higher cost because you need to flush out that lower portion of your deck to survive, right? I've done drafts on the channel actually where I've had people comment, why would you pick this card over that card? That card is so much better. Yeah, but I'm not going to survive to get to that card if I don't have any 2-drops. So I need to go ahead and pick up that 2-drop, right? It's just a common mistake I think a lot of people make in draft, especially early on when they first start drafting. So hopefully that helps a little bit. And just a quick tip, considering I don't have too much to say about this card otherwise. Raider's Wake. I'm not really high on this card. Here's my issue with it. You're just jumping through too many hoops. It costs 4. And maybe it activates the turn it comes into play, but you need to have a line of attack for it to work. Then your opponent's going to discard a card and take 2 damage. Okay, that's something, but once this is on the battlefield, they're going to start hanging on to cards they don't care about to pitch, and that's not going to hurt their hand too much, even though it does hurt their life total a little bit. But is it enough, ultimately, is the question. I don't really think it is. I mean, you could try to draft a lot of other discard spells to go along with it. Maybe grab a couple of these, a couple duresses, a couple of the pitch 2 cards we saw earlier, and maybe you could get some sort of theme or sub-theme going. But honestly, is that going to be good enough against some of the more aggressive builds you're going to run into or some of the big creature builds? I don't know. I don't know if that's going to really be good enough in most cases. So it feels a little risky to me. It just feels like ultimately a risky play. Again, it's asking too much for standard. Commander, I don't know. Maybe I try it out. There's some commander decks that run some sub-themes of discard. Maybe it's okay as a redundancy there, but I don't know. Even there, it might not be all that great. Revel in Riches. Okay, are you ready for a alternate win condition? Can you get 10 treasures on your side of the battlefield and keep this spell alive for your upkeep? That's the question. It feels like it would be fun to try, right? Like, there's a lot of ways to create treasures. If you can get this in play, maybe you sneak a win in here and there. Could be kind of a fun thing to try to draft around, maybe. So, I don't know. I'd want to try it out. It's a little awkward playing a 5 casting cost card that's not going to do anything for you probably most of the time the turn you play it, but at the same time, if you can get this to pay off, I mean, hey, it doesn't matter, you won the game, right? So could this be a standard deck? I think someone will try to brew it. I don't know how consistent it will be though, because if your opponent just sideboards some enchantment destruction or some artifact destruction in there, it's really going to mess you up. So it might be hard to win once your opponent kind of knows what's going on with this deck, but it could sneak some wins maybe like week 1 or something as Star City games open. I wouldn't be shocked, right? So it feels like it would be fun to pull off. Another fun thing to try to do in Commander perhaps as well with like a Pirate Commander build. I would definitely be on board for that. So yeah, it's a fun card. Like I said, I could see myself trying to draft around this and just trying to make it happen. Rune Raider. Okay, this is actually a pretty interesting one. It costs 3, it's a 3/2, has a nice raid ability. If you can attack, then at the end step, you get to draw a card and you lose life equal to that card's converted mana cost. First off, generally, don't be afraid of that. Card draw at the expense of life is a lot of times a very good thing. So this is a Bob effect. Of course, Dark Confidant is a very powerful card, and this card kind of follows in those footsteps a little bit at least. Now, I will say be careful with this. You don't want this in a limited build if you're going heavy on mana cost, right? If it's a heavy curved deck, you probably want to skip this one. But if you're playing a conservative build and you have a lot of maybe small aggro creatures or something like that, there's a lot of benefit to be had with a card like this. As a matter of fact, I think this could see some standard play in a deck like that. I don't think this necessarily shows up in the Pirate deck because I think that will have some big plays in it, but I think this could show up in maybe like a Rakdos aggro deck at some point during its lifespan, and it could be really good there. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this card is it's a Pirate because it has raid, but it really kind of wants to play with vampires because you'll have the extra life, especially if you're in sealed or draft. I do think this card is probably better in draft where you can control your mana curve a little better. Sealed, some sealed pools will be fine, but not all sealed pools. You want to be a little bit careful there. So it's a good card. It could be a very high pick, actually. Not always going to be ran, though. It's not for all decks, but it's pretty good, just generally. Ruthless Nav. Here's another payout for treasures. This time you can sacrifice 3 treasures to draw a card, and also it's a sack outlet, which is fantastic. I did mention earlier, I think we had a couple threaten effects that are coming up in tomorrow's video in red. Threaten effects and sacrifice effects go together really, really well, and this is another way to just kind of bolster those treasure artifact tokens if you're trying to do something else with them. In this case, either draw cards or maybe even try to get that win condition we just saw. And on top of that, it's still a 3/2 for 3, which is just fine stat-wise for limited. So I think this is an excellent card. You can pick this one up early, and if you happen to get into the treasure plan, wonderful. And if you don't, it's still okay. Still has a lot of utility to offer. Now, I think that activation ability is a little high for standard, but I think the payout's pretty good. So I'm not going to rule this out of showing up in maybe the pirate build at some point, because I think it could be good enough as long as it's generating enough treasures in the course of the gameplay. Sanctum Seeker. This is a great vampire card. On its own, it's okay. Like a 3/4 for 4, and when you attack in, you drain one. All right, that's fine. It's not always going to make a cut, but it's fine. If you have a lot of vampires and you're running all those tokens and such, this could be game winning. Like, this is phenomenal. Notice too, you can play this even if it's not attacking, you still get that ability. Whenever a vampire you control attacks, you get to drain the life. So that's super sweet. You could surprise your opponent, play this, maybe even play one of those combat tricks, or play something that taps down some of your opponent's things, attack in with those small vampires, and combined with this ability, that could be the end of the game. Really, really good play there. And it might even be worth like picking early and drafting, trying to draft vampires, because that way, even if you don't get there, it's not a horrible card on its own either. So regardless of, if you're into vampires and you open this like pack 3, you're going to be very, very happy. Seeker's Squire. Well, here's another Explorer card. This one's a 2-drop. You know these are good because you got a 2-drop, 1/2. That's an uncommon. So I feel like Explorer probably tested well. And because of that, yeah, I'm happy to run this, even though I prefer like 2/2s for 2 or 2/1s. Some of the time this will be a 2/3 with the Explorer ability. And when it's not, you still got to explore. I'm okay with it. Good 2-drop. Skittering Heartstopper. I like these little death touch creatures that slow down the game, gum up the board. This one's a 1-drop. I don't necessarily like activating the death touch, but I'm okay with it. I'd still play this card and be happy with it in limited. Skullduggery. This is a nice combat trick. It's cheap, instant speed, of course, and you can even get rid of a 1 toughness creature with this, just almost like a removal spell. This is nice if you don't have enough good removal spells. Sometimes this will get nudged out of your build if you have enough decent removal and you just feel like, okay, I don't necessarily need this, but it's a good combat trick. You'll be happy to run it a lot of the time. Skymarch Bloodletter. Okay, you get a Windrake with upside. Very, very playable and limited. Maybe not a first, second, third pick or something like that, but a nice pickup in the middle of a pack. You'll be happy to run it. It's also a vampire. Sometimes that will matter. And yeah, you get to ping a point of life when it comes in and drain that life. So yeah, okay, that's fine. But I'm really playing this if I'm looking for a flyer. Spreading Rot. Okay, here's your black land destruction card. Not a lot to say about this one. Most of the time this stays in your sideboard until you find an opportunity to play it. The reason I would board this in is if I'm playing against a really good non-basic land, like maybe one of the transform lands that's very good for my opponent, or if my opponent's going really deep on like a 3rd color, like not splashing, but like really getting greedy with a 3rd or even a 4th color, then I'm going to bring this in to try to mess them up a little bit. Swordpoint Diplomacy. I like the art, I like the flavor, the name of this card. For the most part, though, I don't see myself playing it very often. Here's the biggest issue I have with it. It's a card that allows your opponent to make a lot of decisions. Now, if they were making blind decisions, like if the cards are face down, that might be a little bit different. But because they have full control and also full information, they're of course going to make the decision that's going to be the best for them, right? Now, you can paint your opponent into a corner where if they're so low on life, they basically have no choice but to give you the cards. If that's the case, you're probably winning anyway, so that's a little awkward. But at the same time, if you're not in a situation like that, well, this card isn't always going to perform as well as you might imagine that it would. Think of it this way. If you're behind, the card is really going to be hard for it to do anything really to have you come back, because your opponent might be in a position where they can just simply take 9 damage and just not give you any cards and finish you off in another turn or two. Another issue is you're behind on mana. You're trying to get some land drops. Your opponent's going to know that, so when they see the 3 cards, they might say, you know what, take the 2 creatures and I'll take 3 damage and the land gets exiled. Or vice versa. Later in the game, you're mana flooded, you're trying to get some sort of heat. They're not going to let you do that either, right? So it's going to be really, really hard for this card to be effective to you. And just on paper, it feels like kind of a middle-of-the-road draw spell. It's sorcery speed. It costs 3. You know you're not going to be getting 3 cards out of this in most situations. It's probably 1 or 2. And keep in mind that first card is just simply replacing this one. So for all those reasons, I find this very awkward. I don't see myself running this. in any circumstance, at least that I can think of in Limited, in Draft or Sealed. I feel like maybe I might try it out if I have a hyper-aggressive deck and I feel like I can do a lot of early damage. Because again, if my opponent gets down to a low life total, their decision-making gets boxed in a little bit. In that case, the card might not be the worst thing in the world, but still, would I play this over maybe another creature or another direct damage spell? I don't know. As far as Constructed goes, when this card was originally previewed, a few people mentioned in the comments section that Rakdos Burn might be a good place for it. And that actually makes a lot of sense because it's going to be light on land, and most of the time when the cards are revealed, they could be, who knows, like 3 burn spells, and then your opponent's just in trouble because they're going to get burned either way, right? So they don't really truly have a decision to make there. They're just going to take damage. So I do think the card makes sense in a build like that. It is very niche, though. Like, you have to find the right deck for something like this, and that scope is pretty narrow, I think, but Rakdos Burn certainly does qualify for one where it could make sense. Vanquish the Weak. Yeah, this is fine instant speed removal for 3. It just deals with small things, can't deal with some of the big things, but that's okay, especially if you're strapped for removal. And I want to rule this card out of standard play, actually, just because at some point you may find a deck that's really leaning on some small creatures, and this could be a fine sideboard card to deal with that strategy, at least at some point during its lifespan, so it's possible anyway. But yeah, if nothing else, you'll be happy running one of these in your limited deck. Vicious Conquistador. I'm not really high on this card. I know it's a 1-drop, and it's a 1-2. When you attack in, it actually attacks in kind of like a 2-2, because you're doing the 1 point of life loss. But here's where it gets awkward for me. Like, I'd just rather have a 2-2, and I'll pay 2 for the 2-2, and that's fine with me, because I want the 2-2s to be able to interact better in combat. I want them to deal with other 2-2s. I want them to deal with 3-2s. I don't want the 1-2 that when I attack, it's kind of like a 2-2. I just rather pay the extra mana for the 2-2. Vraska's Contempt. Great removal spell. It costs 4, but at least it's an instant. You gain a couple life. Maybe that matters, maybe it doesn't. I mean, it plays thematically with the vampires a little bit, I guess. But exile target creature planeswalker, yeah, that's awesome. Considering the removal we're losing in standard from the other sets, this card is going to be fantastic. It's going to see standard play all day long, and it's first pickable in a draft. Awesome, awesome card. Walk the Plank, another first pickable removal card in draft. This one at uncommon. Sure, can't deal with merfolk, but how often is that really going to be a problem? Some of the time, but most of the time, you'll find a good target for this for 2 mana. It's sorcery speed, it's not an instant, so you do have to kind of realize that. But at the same time, fantastic, cheap removal spell. Yes, 2 on color, yes, sorcery, but I don't care about all these things. I'm still playing it, and this will see standard play. Another great removal spell. Wanted Scoundrels. I actually played with the red in 1 card recently that was the 4/3. You had to discard a card when it came into play and had success with that one. This one I'm not as high on, though, because I feel like giving my opponent access to 2 more mana is kind of a bad thing. Because I play this, and the whole idea of playing a card like this is you want to try to cheat some early damage across. But if I play this and I give my opponent mana, then they're just going to play something that can actually block this, or they're going to play a removal spell. And then what did I really get out of it? We kind of just exchanged cards. Granted, they exchanged a higher value card than I exchanged more than likely, but I did give them access to 2 of the mana anyway. So, yeah, I don't know. It's okay if you need a 2-drop, I guess, but it's a little bit of a gamble. With that being said, those are the cards for today. So we're halfway through the set now. Tomorrow we're going to be back with all of the red cards. The next day green, and the last day we will look at all of the rest of the set, colorless and multicolor cards. So until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.